Ever played a shooter with a particularly thumping soundtrack, one that you just can't help but get into the rhythm of, so much so that you instinctively start landing your shots and reloading your weapons to the beat? Well, chances are you may find BPM, bullets per minute, a very interesting game. This is a rhythm-based FPS. It takes place in shifting roguelike-esque halls and features a style that takes heavy inspiration from Norse mythology. Not every action you perform here is done to the beat, but for the most part it is tied to your trigger pulls, your reloads, and your ability to dash out of harm's way. Assisting you in this endeavor is the crosshair, which keeps track of the beat. As long as you line up your shots to the chevrons, you should be good as gold. Some weapons can fire at a faster rate than others, taking advantage of not just the main beat but also the half beat that comes between. But if I had to mention the action that will most frequently have you fudging those rhythmic button presses, it would probably be the reloads. These can differ from weapon to weapon, but if there's one consistency across all of them, it'll be that you're never simply just going to press the reload button once. Now, I'll freely admit, I did not enter into BPM with an impeccable sense of rhythm already intact. This is something that I had to finesse over time, because as you'll find, some weapons are more fiddly than others. At its least complex, a reload will take at least 2 button presses, taking the magazine out, putting the magazine back in. At its most complex, however, you'll be dealing with the likes of this pump-action shotgun here, which not only requires a pump between every shot, but also requires you to manually reload each shell to the beat. Now, I won't lie, on more than one occasion, the pump-action shotgun here has been the architect of my demise, but the real thrill of BPM isn't simply nailing those rhythms, it's being able to do so under escalating pressure. And rooms such as this, I feel, exemplify that sentiment. Being able to scrape through a situation like this by the skin of my teeth is exhilarating. But as you delve deeper through the stages of BPM, you'll discover that rooms like this will occur on a more and more frequent basis, and how you deal with them will depend on equal parts skill and whether or not you're on good terms with who else? Our old pal, RNGesus. Ah yes, randomization, truly the bread and butter of the roguelite genre. The element that ensures no 2 runs are exactly the same, and the factor that can occasionally result in a boss fight that either has you fighting for every notch of that enemy health bar, or conversely, turns the entire encounter into a case of haha chain gun go. As for the variables you may encounter on a run-by-run basis, if you've ever experienced the Binding of Isaac, then you'll have a reasonable idea of what to expect from BPM. Level layouts are randomized, as is the composition of enemies found within, but in terms of that enemy variety, you can still be relatively assured that they'll pull from a stage-specific bracket. You're not going to be running into something endgame tier earlier on. There's also a multitude of shops and very unique rooms to be discovered on any given attempt. On a frequent basis, you'll find that readily accessible rooms will include the likes of the Merchant, which takes the form of a giant celestial chicken, and can largely be relied on to supply you with the likes of healing and support items. If you're after weaponry, however, the Blacksmith will be your desired destination. You can't always guarantee that he'll be carrying whatever death dealer you crave, but you can be reasonably assured that the most bang will certainly be acquired for the most amount of coin. Now, the acquisition of items and weaponry is not solely exclusive to those shops. Items, for example, can readily be found as the occasional reward for clearing a room, usually denoted by a fancier than normal box. They can also be discovered in their own unique rooms, some of them forcing you to make a choice between a collection of 4, whereas another may present you with a tantalizingly locked box, simply requiring a key. When it comes to weaponry, however, stumbling across one in the wild is an altogether rarer proposition. It's nice when it happens, but you probably shouldn't rely on it too much in terms of how best to plan any given run. Nope, for the most part, you'll be budgeting using the currency of keys and coin. Coin is almost certainly the most plentiful resource that you'll come across during your journeys, dropped by enemies, given out as rewards in boxes, and sometimes offered up for a sacrifice of health. Coin is not just useful for buying supplies and purchasing weapons, but also for improving the stats of your character, something that becomes vital as you progress deeper into BPM. But as for how this is achieved, you'll find that during your travels in the varied rooms of any given stage, you will stumble across a statue. Offering a coin will improve that statue's associated stat. The stats themselves are largely self-explanatory, ranging from speed, range and luck to damage, precision and ability. But in all honesty, the statue that I actively sought out above all else just out of sheer effectiveness would be the statue dedicated to damage. Not that I actively neglected all else, such is the nature of RNG that occasionally you'll have to pick from a selection of lesser options, in which case range is almost certainly a good pick because, somewhat inexplicably, the weapons of BPM feature projectiles that seem to evaporate halfway across a room, unless of course you have sufficient investment in that particular stat. I'd say luck is also a worthwhile category to invest in. Certainly improves the likelihood of favorable rolls when it comes to boxes that you can open, the content of shops, and of course the casino basins, as I like to call them, because you'll just keep plowing money into them until they reward you with something worthwhile. As for how this all comes together in the long run, well, I'd say this is fairly typical of any other given roguelite. It's certainly not seeking to reinvent the wheel, the formula is very much front and center, so the true question becomes, does this do enough to differentiate itself from the tidal wave of other roguelite titles out there? And I dare say that thanks to the implementation of its rhythm-based gameplay, it does. There's just such a simple yet profound satisfaction to shooting, reloading, dodging to the beat, noticing that enemies have particular attack patterns that fall on those beats. The feeling that every successful trigger pull, every click click boom is just you providing your own extra layer of instrumentation to that already suitably badass soundtrack. It's Guitar Hero with guns. I'd say that if there's a particular fly in the ointment of BPM, it would be the literal flies. I friggin' hate those things. But no, seriously, there are a few aspects of it that irk me ever so slightly. As interesting as I find the bold monochromatic styling of BPM, I do find that more often than not it can cause certain enemies to blend in with the background and allow them to land a cheeky hit, whereas otherwise if they were just a smidge more identifiable, I would have easily been able to get out the way. That was certainly a source of minor frustration, especially when dealing with characters that feature lower health, or in one particular case a character that literally dies after a single hit. My next gripe may be slightly contentious, but if I'm going to be honest, I'm slightly on the fence about it myself. I feel like some of the items here could do with just a little bit more information when it comes to the flavor text. If anything, I reckon this game would do really well with something like a codex when it comes to newly discovered items, because on more than one occasion I've come across the same item with the same single word description, such as say cleaving, and not had an absolute goddamn clue at what it actually does. Now, I get the intent behind this, which is fine, it's all playing to the roguelite formula. You're learning by doing, you're gaining knowledge as well as skill on successive runs, but I just feel like the balance of information could stand to be increased just ever so slightly. Let's see, any other gripes? Well, I guess my eyes ache ever so slightly, what with the monochromatic visuals after playing this for multiple hours upon hours upon hours, because I felt compelled to do just one more run, so that just winds up being a compliment. Yeah, not a lot of gripes. So, on to the positives then. Boy do I enjoy the boss fights in this game. There's one at the end of every single stage here, featuring their own particular piece of music, which is always suitably badass, featuring custom attacks and patterns for you to tangle with and figure out. And even though you're running into the same boss at the end of each stage on successive runs, there is a chance that you may end up encountering a variant. And these can come in a myriad of flavors. You can get giant varieties, dwarf varieties, cloned varieties, champion varieties. I'm sure there's even a possibility in there if you're running across a dwarf champion cloned variety, or just a version that's endlessly on fire. These all add a nice little sprinkling of spice to an encounter that you may previously assume you have completely down. And dodging a double champion variety of a boss is no joke, let me tell you that. Dealing with those attacks can mess up your rhythm real quick. That said, in my experience so far with BPM, I have discovered that I run into vanilla varieties of latter stage bosses more frequently than I do the variants, which I feel should be tweaked. I feel like I should be running into variants much more frequently than I do vanilla when it comes to getting deeper into those latter stages. Either that or I'm just extremely lucky. But yeah, as is the nature of the roguelike formula, you'll find that more often than not you'll be reaching these stages relatively well equipped, relatively well statted up, and yeah, for as much as I enjoy them, I do feel that they could stand to be tougher, much tougher. While expected, there is also a nice degree of replayability here, and it's more than just the novelty of discovering new items and mechanics on a fresh run. You've also got multiple classes to discover, and these are unlocked depending on certain completion conditions. And as you progress deeper and deeper, the game will reward you with successive class unlocks, all of them save one becoming available on completion of the campaign on easy. That aforementioned extra one, however, you'll have to do it on hard, but even then, with all classes available, you're not done. Each character has an additional slot for an ability as well as an ultimate, and these can be permanently filled out as a loadout option by completing their respective runs on hard. Happily, playing as these alternate classes does provide a spin on the experience. You've got one character that will start you off with a more powerful weapon than usual, but as a consequence, you'll be dealing with health largely made up of armor, which is a tad trickier to recoup. One, in exchange for a better weapon, has just lower health outright, and I believe a higher likelihood of money appearing in their runs, whereas another will eschew weaponry entirely. You'll be able to see it, but you won't be able to touch it. Instead, forced to use that character's signature attack, blasting enemies with energy projectiles instead. If that's not enough for you, you'll discover that the final unlockable class, Oda, has a one-hit health bar. So if somehow you found that victory has come relatively easy with those other classes, Oda is certainly going to give you a run for your money. So yeah, relatively fully featured, and to a degree that doesn't feel like it's overstuffing itself, which I feel can be a particular pitfall when it comes to other roguelite styled games. But here I was more than happy to pick up another run, just to see if I could nail one more attempt, unlock one more slot, maybe discover another unique item or weapon. And the crux of all of that is the fact that the core gameplay here is just so damn enjoyable. I think it's safe to say that when it comes to the rhythm-based gameplay that forms the central gimmick of this game, they have thoroughly nailed it. It feels good in all the right ways. You've not only got the feedback of the beat, but you've also got the pulsing of the HUD when you successfully fire off a shot. Just those little extra touches here and there that really help sell the impact of what you're doing. And then there's all the other touches, almost too numerous to mention. The fact that the monsters have noises they make that are also in sync to the soundtrack, not that you'll notice them amidst the hail of gunfire and wailing guitars. And one of my favorite aspects by far has to be the freestyle power chord kill shots that you can inflict on bosses when you finally brought them down. It's just nice. So when it all comes down to it, you can easily say that the rhythm-based gameplay here was the tasty bait, the roguelite mechanics formed the hook, and as for the rest, well, you can consider me thoroughly reeled in. What I'm trying to say here is you should play BPM, it's pretty freaking good.